We've got a great set of speakers here today. They're all digital veterans coming from various backgrounds, agency side, sales side, creative side. I think you're going to really enjoy what you're about to see. But I want to start by just talking a little bit about native ads. And first I want to ask how many people in this room have experience either creating, running, buying, measuring native ads of any kind? Nice, maybe 1 in 8 people. So a lot of you see this as a new medium. And I would say it's probably one of the newest, although in some forms, Google AdWords, for example, it's been around for many years. Dan and I were just debating whether or not Google AdWords is truly native. There you go. But native ads really, the definition, I've talked to a lot of people and I've heard a lot of different definitions, but I came up with one I like actually on the plane this morning. But I'm calling it advertising that participates in or enhances a content experience instead of interrupting or co-opting a content experience. So the keywords here are advertising. So this is not just content. Advertising is designed to pull something off to help achieve marketing or business objectives. Participates in or enhances. That means that consumers don't feel threatened by it. They don't want to skip it because it becomes a part of their experience. And it's instead of interrupting or co-opting, which is what most of us have done for most of our careers. So this is kind of my interim definition. There's a couple other definitions out there. If you look on Wikipedia, they'll tell you it looks like an advertorial. So the definition, I think, is still evolving, but it's important that we understand, at least in this room, what we're going to be talking about today. But what should we measure? So, and this is another thing I hope some of the panelists will address, but if you're talking about making something that doesn't look like an ad, then you can't really assume that it has the same impact as an ad. So that means that maybe you don't want to measure reach the same way you would with traditional advertising. Maybe you don't look at a cost per thousand or buy it on a cost per thousand because each impression that looks like content doesn't help you with your marketing goals the way a television commercial might. So maybe instead of CPM, you buy on a CPC. And now you have to talk about where you're sending someone. Or maybe you buy it on a CPE. And now you have to talk about creating an engaging experience that goes beyond just that participate in or enhance the content experience. So the question we're all kind of wrestling with, at least in my head and many of the people I talk to, is what should we be measuring and how do we know it works? We're certainly seeing a lot more engagement with native ads than we do with traditional display. I think that's a fact at this point. But are we getting the marketing benefit out of our spending that we're doing in native? So that's one question. Second question is, what do we create? Advertising agencies are great at making ads, but they are terrible at making great content that consumers want to watch. And those two things are not the same. And so many brands think if they just make a great TV commercial, that their consumers will share it or love it. And they're wrong. The most shared videos are almost never ads. So one thing to think about is, and a problem to think about solving is, what do brands create? Anybody can create content, whether it's taking a photo, tweeting, posting an image, posting a video, drawing a picture. But the trick is making something that's really compelling, really engaging, and also sells your product or creates awareness or intent. So I want you to keep those two problems in mind as you listen to these presentations we're about to go through. Number one, what should we measure? How do we know it's working? And number two, how do we know what to create? So with that, these are the panelists who will be speaking today, starting with Dan Greenberg, who's the CEO of ShareThrough. I think probably one of the first times I heard about native advertising was from Dan in my office saying this is going to be the future. And this was about 18 months ago, I think. So he's been doing this about as long as anybody. And ShareThrough, if you don't know, is a very innovative technology company that understands very well what engages consumers and gets them to share. Julie Jensen runs digital media at Clorox. And from her bio, it looks like she's done so many different things in her career that give her experience that will be really valuable to marketers, brands, sellers, et cetera. Bob Tacey from Donor is a pioneer. He was doing internet TV in the 90s, connected TV, believe it or not. And he's moved on to try just about everything you can try in digital. Tony Winders, SVP of marketing at GumGum. GumGum, if you don't know, is the original turning photos into ads technology. and they've evolved a lot actually with some of the new ad products, including things that I think will blow your mind. Maybe some will see today. And Stefan Poster, wonderful to have a creative person on the panel because this is an ad technology conference. And so for those of you that have been listening to people talk about resolution sizes and loading and APIs, it'll be nice to hear someone who talks a little bit about art. Stefan is famous for a couple campaigns, namely the Curiously Strong Mints, Altoids, among other things, and he's won just about every award you can imagine. So we're really lucky to have this group. The order of presentations will be Dan and Julie will present first, then Bob and Tony will get up and present second. They have a combined case study, and Stefan will go last, and then we should have time for questions. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Dan and Julie to come up, and I'll get your presentation going.
Hey everybody, Dan Greenberg. Thanks, Dave.
Sure.
I am totally honored to present this with Julie. Julie was just telling me her sort of beginnings of her long life story, apparently. We only got one step backwards, but Julie helped invent what Federated Media had been doing. It wasn't necessarily called native, but definitely in the same world of content marketing for the past 4 or 5 years. So I think the way we're going to do this is we're going to talk through a little bit of a framework for native, framework for content marketing, and how content and native are two sides of the same coin. I think really that's the goal here, is to share sort of this top-line framework, and then dive pretty deep into the way Clorox is thinking about native and content and how they use native as a paid media vehicle for the content that they're producing. So a few examples of video, a few examples of non-video. When it comes to the Clorox stuff, I'll let Julie speak to it, but I'll do a quick intro around sort of how we're thinking about native and where we're going from here. Cool. Go for it. Awesome. So native really starts from one truth that I think everybody probably believes in, and I agree it's good to have a creative person on the panel, is that brands are producing more content than ever from the point of view of actually trying to create content that somebody wants to spend time with. And that's a new concept. Pre-Facebook, pre-Twitter, pre-YouTube, there wasn't really any reason or way for users to find brand content to spend time with. There was no sort of direct connection between brands and users. So brands across the industry, I mean, you guys all probably saw this Red Bull thing. I love this example. This is Red Bull, who's sort of the guru of branded content, producing content that I think at the max 8 million people tuned in simultaneously to essentially just watch their ad. Not everybody is Red Bull, but I think some of the stuff you're going to see from Clorox today, from the Clorox point of view, gets pretty close, at least for your audience. If you look at sort of just the top line metrics on the market too, I think there's 3 metrics, 2 on the page here. One is that brands spent over $1.5 billion last year producing sponsored content, and that means not distributing it, just producing it. Julie, you just said what, 7 to 10x is the stat. So usually 7 to 10x for traditional media is what you would spend on the ratio of producing the content, so producing a banner ad with point roll or producing a banner ad in Photoshop even, and then actually running it through paid media or TV ad to TV media. If you look at the amount spent on sponsored content last year, that would suggest to me that the distribution and paid media behind this should have been $10 billion. Lo and behold, I actually think it was probably close to that. Nobody, no e-marketer, no ComScore has kind of put a number behind it. But if you look at Facebook's revenue, sponsored stories on Facebook that are native and all about content, Twitter is all about native promoted tweets and content. YouTube, TrueView promoted videos, all about native user experience. All those add up to about $10 billion. So anyway, there's money to be thrown into this ecosystem, and it actually is already a pretty real ecosystem. First Clorox example, I love this one. I found this actually as we were preparing for this panel. This is some e-cards, which some of you guys have probably seen. This is just examples of content that's not what you would necessarily expect. It's not a banner ad. It's not a 300 by 250. It's not a 728 by 90. It's not a pre-roll. It's not a print ad. It has to feel like it's native to that site itself. So the way we think about, or the way I think about brand content and native, is that this is the content. It becomes a native ad the moment you pay to promote this through a sponsored story on Facebook, or pay to promote this through a sponsored story on people.com or on Forbes or on Twitter or on some publisher. So just like Dave said, native advertising is advertising. You have to pay to promote it. Other couple examples, Mini has produced some awesome content. I think this is a series with Mashable or something, Hipster Road Trip, Mini producing a series of interesting pieces of content. Mashable does a ton of sponsored content. The challenge is this content get stuck inside the walled garden. So when native comes in, native is essentially the way to distribute that content. The way I define native, which is, I agree with your definition and I have another definition, so I don't disagree, is that if you take whatever the atomic unit is of a site, so on Facebook it's a story, and on Twitter it's a tweet, and on YouTube it's a video, on Forbes it's a story, on People it's a story. If you take that atomic unit and you just make that the ad, that's how you do native on any website. So native on Forbes.com, as you scroll through the feed on your phone, is a sponsored story in the news feed. Native on Facebook is a sponsored story. Native on Twitter is a promoted tweet. And you're seeing this across the board. Foursquare is doing promoted check-ins, and Tumblr is doing promoted posts. And I think every new major platform of record is starting from the point of view of native as opposed to starting from banners and trying to figure out native. Again, it has to be visually integrated, it has to be choice-based, it has to be content-based, it has to be something that users choose to spend time with. I probably don't have to say this, but just why this is happening is because anytime you hit me with an ad that I don't want, I find a way to either mute it or skip it or ignore it or close it. If you hit me with a pre-roll, it's very rare that I say, you know what, I'll watch your pre-roll right now. Maybe I mute it and open a new tab. Maybe I skip it, maybe I close it. But it's very rare from at least my personal perspective to choose to get interrupted by something. Same thing applies with banners. So as content becomes mainstream, the real question is for brands like Clorox, how do we then both produce content, I think you're going to speak to that in a second, and how do we produce content in a way that we're not expecting perfectionism, but produce content on scale? But then really the real challenge is how do I distribute this content as scalably as I distribute my TV ads or my print ads? So with that, I'm going to hand this to you so you can give us sort of a quick rundown on the type of stuff you guys have been up to.
Hi there. So when you look at some of the work that we're producing a number of different types of content. As you saw before, the content piece for Clorox and the actual e-card was what we distributed within Facebook. So when we create video content, sometimes we create really compelling TV spots like Liquid Plumber and distribute it. But that wouldn't be, from the way that we're talking about it right now, native per se. Really, if we look at the Glad Black Bag example, which really we were looking at an opportunity that we wanted to keep Glad within the digital ecosphere, and we really wanted to take advantage of this idea that we wanted to introduce Black Bag into the home and not just have people think about it for leaves and for outdoor activities. So what we did for the actual creative, we don't have sites out in motion, so I'm going to talk through it for you in a moment. So we took it in the home and we made the actual family animals. So bringing the wildlife in, because sometimes from a chief household officer perspective, you can think that your family is actually treating your house like animals would. So bringing Black Bag in the home and creating scenarios where Black Bag could actually be helpful was the actual creative. And going back to what we were talking about before, of how did we, so that was the concept, that was the creative, but how did we then bring that to life? We did it actually through native, and through that, and with share through, we were able to get really, really immersive engagement. And that was the measurement scoring that we looked against this for. So when we think about native advertising, if you talk to me about native advertising and the way that the organization at Clorox is thinking about native advertising is to say that, okay, right now it actually has a name. It has a name of native advertising. But really at the end of the day, when you start to think about how consumers engage with content, it's really just going to be advertising. It's really the smart way to connect with users in an environment that is helpful for them to see what, as brands, we're giving them, the value that we're giving them. And that's really what our job as marketers is to create the connected consumer experiences in the right environments in a native way to bring the message to life and across, that it's not just integrated into the content, but it's actually driving the marketing forward and driving our business forward, but through a valuable way. Through a valuable way that is allows consumers to participate in what we're talking about. So the experience for us, I mean, it's been great, quite frankly. I mean, we have had some really great experiences. Engagement is through the roof. Really where we struggle with, and Dan and I were talking about this earlier, where we struggle with it is the scale. I mean, we're a CPG. We move volume. And at the end of the day, when you're looking at different types of industries, we have different values on what we need from media. And from CPG, we need scale. We need to get to our consumers, and we need to make a difference. So when we think about native, and we think the way that the pricing is structured, and we think about what we're going to actually be able to do in this space, we need scale. And right now, the scale isn't there. So we can dive into native, but it's not something that I can jump in both feet and say, okay, 70% of what I'm going to do is native. That's not the way that it's going to work, because I need to make sure that my scale is efficient. And my scale needs to be super efficient, because everything that I do runs through my econometric model. If my econometric model is not spitting out that these different tactics are providing me the value that it needs to provide, I'm not going to be able to do it at scale. I'll be able to do it tactically. I'll be able to test it. I'll be able to learn from it. But in order for me to actually dig in deep, I need the scale.
I love that comment. I think as an entrepreneur trying to build a market, that's music to my ears when a marketer says, I get it and it works on a unit basis, just like I get that Teslas are awesome, but there's just not enough of them, right? Everybody should have a Tesla, but they can't produce them fast enough. Everybody should be buying native, and we want to spend $50 million buying native, but I don't have the scale for it. I love that, though. That's music to my ears, at least, that our customers do come to us and they say, what is the limits of your inventory? How many publishers are doing native? How many publishers have integrated these sponsored story types of placements? And I think that's the challenge for the space, and I think you're totally right, is can the rest of the internet, that's really my question, can the rest of the internet do what Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Pinterest, and a handful of closed platforms are doing? Or does the future of advertising just go to those walled gardens? Clearly I have a point of view, and I think we all probably have a point of view too, that the rest of the internet, all those big-ass buildings in New York, Hearst and Time and Gannett and Condé Nast and New York Times, they will figure it out. It's not just going to be native, great ads on Facebook, but traditional banner ads on the New York Times. It's going to be sponsored stories, and it's going to be things that feel native to the sites. I wanted to leave you guys with just sort of one sort of postcard from the future, maybe visual of what the world could look like in a year or in 2 years. This today is what's happening on Facebook and Twitter. It's, again, the atomic unit of the sites turn into the native ad, or turn into the ad. I agree we shouldn't even call it native. It should just be advertising. So advertising done well is when you take the atomic unit and make that the ad. Facebook and Twitter make sense, but how do you do that on the rest of the web? The way that I'm thinking about it is that you go to a site like Forbes, and in the recommended content section of Forbes, if you surface one of the recommendations as an ad and call it sponsored by Clorox or sponsored by Coke or whatever, that's a native way to monetize Forbes.com. Similarly, on a long-tail site even, so sort of postcard from the future here, imagine a world where the long-tail web has sponsored stories just like Facebook, but to the native user experience, the native design, the native format of every site that it lives on. So that's what we're doing. There are a handful of other companies thinking about it, Google included. But imagine a world where this website or this website says, hey, Google, I don't want to put a banner ad here. I don't want a 300 by 250. I want a piece of content from a brand that gets integrated to my feed of content naturally, and that's a choice based for the user as opposed to something that interrupts or a pre-roll or a pop-up. So there's a lot more innovation and creativity to be done here. I'll leave you guys with, I guess, one last thought, which is that if you look at engagement rates and click-through rates, maybe it sounds backwards, but at least to me, that's kind of the driving metric for success here. Banner ad click-through rates are 0.02, 0.04, 0.05. That means 5 in 10,000 people click it, whatever, 5 in 2,000 people. I'm actually looking at it from the perspective of what can we do to make the click-through and engagement rates on ad content, native ad content, get parity with the click-through rates on the natural content. And we've actually seen in some cases, like this might even be a case, the click-through rate on the magnetic bottle opener might be 2%. The click-through rate on the Charmin 2-minute video also might be 2%. And that's really sort of the future of advertising. If content and ads can actually have the same sort of engagement, if ads can be as engaging as the content, that's kind of the holy grail for everybody. I think that's what we'll leave that with today. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. That was great. The Holy Grail. That's it. We all know now that that's the Holy Grail. So really interesting stuff. I think focusing mostly on some of the existing platforms and video. I think Share-Through is best in class at that. I think what GumGum does is a little bit different. So the currency of the web, really, the social web, is photos. They're easily digestible. Even sites like BuzzFeed, I think, have learned that photos work a lot better and are shared more easily than videos at this point. And so we're going to shift gears a little bit to talk more about photography instead of just a video strategy. Not that photography can't lead to video view, but it is the currency of the web, and more marketers should be capitalizing on it. So with that, we'll talk to Tony and Bob.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Hi, everyone. My name's Tony Winders. I'm the SVP of Marketing at GumGum in Los Angeles.
And I'm Bob Tacey, SVP of Donor Advertising in Southfield, Michigan.
And we'd like to thank everyone for being here, and we're looking forward to sharing our in-image advertising case study for Donor's client, Cat's Pride. So there's probably nothing more native to the internet than photos of cats. And as Mashable pointed out, not surprisingly, that internet users recently voted the cat to be Monopoly's latest game piece. And so it also comes as no surprise that Donor would choose images as a way to get in images of cats as a way to get in front of cat enthusiasts. And so we'll talk more about the in-image component in a moment, but Bob, why don't you set up where in-image fit into the overall campaign?
Sure. Thanks, Tony. Our client is Oil Dry, not a household name, but they are the world's largest manufacturer of cat litter. A little trivia for you. And the brand is Cat's Pride. And what our mission was as their advertising agency was to launch a new product for them called Fresh and Light. It was a formula that they created that was 25% lighter than their previous cat litter or their standard cat litter. So we had to generate awareness of this particular product and get across that value proposition of it being lighter. Cat's Pride is the third cat litter brand, so again, awareness was important. Tidy Cat and Arm & Hammer are the first two, so we weren't able to outspend and also didn't have the awareness that those did. So we had to look kind of very creatively about how we were going to generate this awareness for these new products. Obviously, our goal was to hit cat enthusiasts, and when we thought about a strategy, we knew the same thing that Mashable did, that there was this symbiotic relationship between cat owners and the internet. They love seeing pictures of cats, videos of cats, talking about their cats on the internet, and so we made digital a big focus of the overall campaign strategy. Some of the tactics that we employed were to contextually target cat owners while they were in cat sites, as well as behaviorally target people that showed cat ownership behaviors, I guess, and even through off-site purchases. For example, we partnered with Catalina and used some of their data and targeted people who made cat litter or cat food purchases at retail. So some of the tactics we employed to get into content-relevant sites, we ran on sites like PetMD, Cat Time, Paw Nation. The kind of famous meme sites, ICANN has Cheeseburger. We went all out on that site. We did homepage takeovers. We did a skin. We even did a little native where we sponsored an area within that was just for Cat's Pride, where people could post kind of funny pictures of their cat. Social was also a big component because we knew that people really like to talk about their cats and share cat stories. So we did a small kind of CPG site for them, but we really did a large Facebook presence and made that the focus of the site. Our community managers had fun and our creatives had fun creating content that, again, natively we kind of pushed out as sponsored posts on Facebook. We turned Saturdays into Catterdays, where we posted funny pictures of cats with captions that we hope would get shared. We took advantage of current events that were going on, like the elections or the Academy Awards, and we did little executions like this, Django Unleashed. And And then finally, we even had a kind of a weekly columnist, Dear Tabby, who doles out advice to cat owners about what's going on in the world with their cat. So to round that out, we also did some advertising on the mobile platform. This was a great way to hit people while they are out of home, close to retailers such as Walmart, where we had distribution for the cat litter. We did do a TV commercial, and we wanted to get additional kind of reach and frequency of that TV commercial online, so we did purchase pre-roll video executions on video ad networks. And then in-image advertising with GumGum. What we really liked about in-image advertising is we really felt that it combined this kind of contextually relevant area where we knew that we were going to find people that were interested in cats because it was going to be cat-related content, but it also had that scale of the pre-roll video and was going to allow us to get wider distribution of that video unit. So I'll turn it over to Tony to go into some more details about in-image advertising.
Okay, thanks, Bob. So for those of you who may not be familiar with in-image advertising, it's actually one of the fastest growing forms of display advertising right now, so much so that the IAB recently announced that they're forming a task force on in-image advertising to really understand better the size of that market and its opportunity. But quite simply, in-image advertising is displaying rich media ad units overlaid on still photos. So very, very straightforward conceptually, but not uncomplicated technically. And so GumGum developed this technology about 5 years ago, but in the recent past, it's really started to scale. Advertisers are trying it, and our JavaScript is on over 1,000 brand-safe websites, which gives us that scale. And then the core technology has to do with understanding what images are about, both based on the content of the page, the contextual semantic analysis of the page, the metadata of the images, but even at a pixel-based level, image recognition technology understands what a photo is about, such that we can target ads based on a category or a keyword basis. And the result is that ads appear in line with relevant content where a user's attention is actively engaged. And so there's really no better way to share in-image advertising than to show you an example. And so we're going to do a live demo here. And let's see. There we go. So as this page loads, you can see the rich media ad unit. That's our runway unit. I'll refresh that so you can see it again. So that's GumGum's runway unit. It's a custom-made animated unit. And when I engage with the creative, you'll see a light box comes up and plays a 30-second video, which donor created for Cat's Pride. That is a lot of fun. So we'll do that now.
For years, you've struggled with heavy cat litter.
Oh.
And you've found ways to cope. But now there's new Cat's Pride Fresh and Light. Its special blend not only absorbs odor-causing enzymes, it's up to 25% lighter, with the same number of uses as other clumping litters. Less work for you and your cat. New Fresh and Light, changing litter for good.
So nothing beats great creative, right? And
Yeah, it was really tough to get that cat to do all that, but he was a trooper.
so from this video lightbox overlay, you can see that you can link through to the official website for the brand or the social media sites for the brand. And if the user is to close that, you're back on the page where you first encountered the creative. And there is a close button on every piece of creative, so it's very politely delivered to consumers. And with that, we'll go back to the presentation. And go ahead, Bob.
Sure. So, what we liked about, GumGum, first of all, our first challenge was when we saw it, it was new to us, this, in-image advertising. And so the toughest thing was to first think about how could we target our customer based on what pictures they were looking at. And then it, occurred to us that, again, cat lovers and owners love pictures of cats. So it became a real natural. Next is we had to kind of trust and believe that GumGum could actually identify pictures of cats, on the internet, and their technology works. And I'm happy to say it did, and it does, and it put us into those contextually relevant environments. Next, we looked at the scalability of it. As Tony mentioned, there's over 1,000 sites. We weren't surprised to see sites like Boston.com or New York Daily News, but we also saw some kind of niche cat sites like Pet Lady or Great Pet Health or Animal World. So it kind of had a nice combination of like news sites where they would have contextually relevant information, but also some kind of smaller contextually relevant sites themselves. Eye tracking studies have shown that consumers' eyes go to images, on content or, within a web page first. And then also, I think we saw that your eye also tracks towards content before advertising. So again, we felt good about that and thought that was really going to help this program. Next is, viewability is a big, buzz term now, and an important aspect, because if your ad isn't seen, then, people aren't going to engage with it or click on it. So the GumGum has technology that their ad, that little animation that you saw, actually doesn't execute until that image comes up above the fold. So either their image was already above the fold and that animation would occur, or somebody scrolled down the page. So again, we were confident that our ads were going to be seen. Next, that little animation we had hoped was going to drive people's eyes to that. So if they weren't already looking at that photo, we had hoped that animation was going to catch their attention. And then our goal was to get people to engage with that unit because, again, when you clicked on it is when you saw that video. And that was really the goal, to get additional visibility of that particular video unit.
So I appreciate that you liked all those things about GumGum, Bob, but you and I both know that if you don't perform, you don't stay on the plan.
Yeah, and I would say that the client was fat and happy about the campaign.
Yeah, so let's take a look at some of those results. We typically see 0.3 to 0.5% CTRs on in-image campaigns, and with the Cat's Pride campaign, it was 3 times that amount at a 1.18% CTR for the entire campaign. And that video that you saw had a 90% play rate and a 50% completion rate. And then the video CTR, those links from that overlay to the social media sites and the official site, was 4.22%, which is also about 3 times what we normally see across the GumGum platform. And more than anything, I think it's a testament to any business when your clients renew. So Donor did renew the Cat's Pride campaign for this spring and doubled the investment. So I would like to thank you for your business, Bob.
All right, thank you, Tony, and thank you for your attention. We'll turn it back over to Dave.
Excellent. Thanks, guys. Thank you. That's great. I had a cat named Frank. It looked just like that orange tabby. It's so sad. That's really awesome stuff. And so you can see these numbers. I mean, the industry average click-through rate, as you guys all know, is creeping downward. And so anything we can do to improve those numbers and get people to actually land on a destination where we can tell a longer or better story is valuable media. So last but not least, we're going to have our creative up here, Stefan Poster from Gyro.
Bear with me a second. I'd rather have my notes, but I don't. I love out of context that one of the gentlemen said, our goal was to hit cat enthusiasts, and depending on my spiritual condition, so is mine. But you can go up on the first. Yeah. Thank you. Sure. Is this the? Yep. All right, guys. I'm going to ask you to bear with me a little bit. I am going to refer to notes. It's not out of disrespect or a lack of planning. I just don't want to deviate from my script, and I want to stay true to the content, because I think while it will strike you as very poetic interpretation of the brief, that it's highly relevant and should, if I do my part as a delivery system, if I can impart what's down here to you in the right spirit, it'll actually fire you up, and you'll begin to open more doors and windows onto what the new world can look like. Like a lot of talks in places like this, mine begins with social media, and as we know, social media exploits an age-old human desire to establish personal connections. Well, so do some of the oldest forms of marketing communications on the planet, billboards, posters, and as well as some of the newest, the native that we're talking about. And it all begins and ends with signs. Unlike other media, signs have existed since the beginning of time. From day one, Mother Nature provided Earth with numerous signs. Creatures perceived these signs and acted accordingly. When the leaves on the trees turned color, it was time to accumulate food and build a nest. In other words, the sign created a behavior. It was working as an advertisement to go get nuts and put them in the ground. Nothing's changed if you look at it from that kind of poetic context. I think the sun itself was a moving billboard. It motivated migration, feeding habits, all kinds of behavior. Not surprisingly, signs also governed man's every move, defining his relationship to the world. Now, with new man's growing inquisitiveness, signs took on even greater meaning, shaping entire belief systems. All you had to do was look up. When man began to make his own signs, creativity was born. His need to create signs was intuitive. And when you talk about how to make native work, you need to remember some of these principles and philosophies. It's in our DNA to respond viscerally to native advertising. Part of the key to these seminars is to figure out how to unlock that so you can drive it. And it is conceptual and it is creative. It isn't just a numbers game, is it? It's as old as that stuff. I don't think much has changed since those primitive wall paintings and these right here from around the corner. We want others to know, who we are, so we make signs to telegraph and portray and project ourselves, to tell people who we are, what we want. When you scratch "I love Jane" into a tree, you're making a sign, and you're especially thrilled because of the longevity of that sign. Long after this particular love affair was over, the heart still remains, and those are exciting ideas to human beings, sort of transcending our own mortality. What we believe, some of the oldest signs are some of the most powerful signs, and they're still just as powerful today as they ever were. We want people to do things our way, or else. Signs can have a very negative connotation. They often do. Either way, positive or negative, we're inspiring people to behave, and that's why they're germane to this conversation. For centuries, signs have governed us for better and for worse. And there's just no denying it. Now, I grew up in the Lakeview neighborhood of Chicago, which is nice now, but when I was a kid, the area was rife with street gangs, right? Violence everywhere. Turf war between the Latin Eagles and the Latin Kings, and their signs threatened from around every corner. So marking one's territory, that's another governance that we might be able to bring into native advertising and signing in general. Now, crude as it sounds, brands exert power marking their territory. We are here, they say, and we mean business. Low tech does not mean less powerful. On the contrary, for advertising, signs can be more humanly relevant than any other media. This is for a drag shop, and yeah, there you go. You're taking advantage of a location, and you're doing a lot of the things that my colleagues or peers, were talking about. So it's pseudo-native, or it is native, or it is some of that other stuff, but this is the way the world takes popular culture and projects brands and ideas and motivates behavior. I really love this one, a piece of ambient out of home for the Joffrey, where the spinning doors. Now, is that native or ambient? I think we're in the hybrid, iterative culture. Everything is sort of a mash into another, and so taking advantage of the revolving doors in this sort of pennies to the dollar kind of execution is just totally brilliant. Even cheaper here, this is just a busted bench that someone put a sticker on advertising karate classes. You gotta love it. So from a totally small experience like that, obviously the big hitters know the power of signs. And I think, every conversation should begin and end with this spirit of propaganda and signage. This seminar, Ad Tech, South by Southwest, it's all about technology, sometimes I think to a fault. I mean, technology is grand, but I think many of us, we try so hard to prove how contemporary we are, and I think sometimes it's a little naive, this notion that we must compete with the screens, all these screens. Well, I'll tell you what, I'm just old enough to remember in the 70s, digital watches were all the rage, right? They were so cool, we all had to have one, and then we didn't. A traditional watch face is timeless, and digital watches have ironically become nostalgia. So be careful when someone's pimping the next new thing. It could be that. So I would just bear that in mind when you're thinking about what drives native advertising or any topic along this floor. Ideas and the stuff that's wired within us. Now this is the coolest part. No other media synergizes this up, in my opinion, like outdoor advertising or ambient. Now take a look at this. The Walking Dead, you all know the show, they put up a billboard, and it was put up next to this kind of New Age funeral parlor, sort of a quick to burial experience. All right, so that sign went up. A couple people complained. The uproar from the media was such that it was deemed an unfortunate placement. All across America, stories ran detailing this unfortunate juxtaposition of message and location. The billboard company issued an apology, blaming human error, calling it an unfortunate mistake. They ultimately took the ad down. All right, well, unfortunate? In one day, I saw this image in my morning paper, in two of my favorite blogs, and on the TV news at night. That's not a tragedy, that's a windfall. For the price of one billboard, A&E got more coverage than they ever would have imagined for their show without paying an extra dime for it. And to me, that's the spirit of native advertising, to be able to synergize with the street, with the culture, with the time and place of your existence, creative. And it doesn't even have to be brilliant creative, just the message in the media, which is an old idea reinterpreted in a totally new, fresh way. The neat thing is, the controversy is now what's underpinning it. The controversy has changed dramatically over just the last few years, and we need to take heed of that. The coverage that this little incident created was advertorial. The coverage itself, the stories, were editorial, not advertorial. They were literally a newscaster telling you in your living room or through your car or off your computer a story about something crazy or something wow or something cray-cray, and they were talking about this. You were listening, you were predisposed to want to hear that story more than any of that created stuff because this was popular culture for real, right there, and people were talking about it. Now, I'm betting the future holds that guys like me are going to have to figure out schemes like that, right? Because that's what clients are really going to want. Not me to create content that looks native, but to put stuff out in the culture, to fire it up and get people talking about it. Whether we like it or not, social media has broken down barriers influencing our culture. We're no longer shy around awkward moments. On the contrary, we get off on them. What once was considered embarrassing is now entertaining, interesting, and provocative. Reality TV did this. advertising is often a catalyst. Signs are usually the touchstone. I'll give you one more example. In a small town, a fairly tame ad was put up for the salon. You know, it's nothing in a city like San Francisco, but in Iowa, it was a little risque. So some cute old lady or the church group complained about it, all right, and the advertiser put up a snipe saying, is it too hot or not? And they put a website, and they invited people to come in and participate. It's freaking genius, because the ad and all that didn't matter anymore. They had created the proverbial conversation, right? That thing we all are supposed to be trying to do by putting up an ad that showed a little too much leg, getting the obligatory lady to complain, then putting up the snipe, which had a built-in microsite all ready to engage people. They had it figured out. This little podunk salon was more hip and cool than half the people in this town by doing something like that. I mean, is that native or what? I don't know, but it's what I think I'm supposed to get paid to do from here on in. I have some other slides, but I'm cognizant of time, and I want to be respectful for yours and to my audience, so thanks a lot. Yay.
Thank you. That was great. Thanks, everybody. What a great reminder that technology and CTR and CPE and ad-serving solutions really don't matter that much without a great creative idea. And that idea doesn't need to live in an ad anymore. It can live natively within content. But either way, what we're really trying to do is inspire. And this is a great reminder that inspiring people is more important than just putting something in front of them. So with that, we have about 5 minutes for questions. So if anybody has any for anyone on the panel, please raise your hand and we'll bring a mic around to you.